Good afternoon. Thank you, Ciara. And I'm delighted with the opportunity to address you, albeit in this remote environment that we've all become accustomed to over the last 14 or 15 months or so. Particularly delighted to address CONUL. I guess there's a significant overlap in membership of CONUL and the IUA. The vast majority of your members are members of the IUA. And those who aren't, we have, I think, a close working relationship with most, if not all of them. A word, first of all, perhaps just about the IUA. I'm assuming most of you probably are reasonably familiar with this, but just very briefly, we have probably two primary pillars of activity within the IUA. Firstly, we're a representative organisation, acting as the voice of our member, the voice of Irish universities. And in that regard, recently we've welcomed TU Dublin. I know there are TU Dublin representatives at the meeting as well. So we've welcomed them to our membership only in the last few weeks. It becomes the 8th member university of the IUA. And with TU Dublin on board, we now have, our members now represent over 2/3 of all undergraduate students in higher education, 80% or more of postgrad students, and over 90% of the research expenditure in the higher ed system. So I guess our mandate as a representative body for the sector has been strengthened, and we look forward to working with TU Dublin as with all our other 7 members as we push forward. The second area of outside of our representative work is we have quite a number of projects in the IUA that we either do directly on behalf of the sector or under contract with EU funding or departmental funding. And amongst those, we have we run the coordinating office for Access, the Dare Here program, which we were involved in founding many years ago. We also host the Campus Engage program, which many of your institutions are involved in relation to community engagement and engage research, an increasingly important pillar of activity for our universities. We host the Your Access program, which is effectively a service that provides fast-track visa access for researchers outside of the EU, and we do that under contract from government. We also host the Marie Curie program, which is effectively a service that supports researchers in applying for funding on the Marie Curie program. And I think for each of the last 8 or the last 10 years, Irish higher ed institutions have had the highest rate of success in Marie Curie funding of any countries in the EU. And then we also have a number of new projects, a couple of which I'll mention later. We an enhanced digital teaching and learning project and a micro-credentials program. So we have about 20 staff, and about half are involved in our core activity, and about half are involved in those projects. So I suppose a pretty busy agenda. For today, I guess I wanted to focus and I wanted this more as a conversation, so I'm not doing PowerPoint. I want to just outline a few thoughts and perhaps then take questions. Kind of 3 key questions I want to look at. First of all, I wanted just to address, I suppose, what COVID has taught us, and a few reflections on that. Secondly, what's needed for Irish universities to excel. And thirdly, a question which I'm not proposing to answer is what the university of the future might look like, but maybe pose some loose thoughts around that, and would be interested in any comments or observations from yourselves through the chat or otherwise. So I guess the first one, what COVID has taught us, well, I suppose on a personal level, you know, we've all had our own unique personal experiences in COVID, and it's been challenging, and they're well heralded, and we're hearing and reading about them in the media every day. And I suppose as we come, hopefully, to emerging out of the worst of the crisis, I mean, it's interesting how it impacts on you personally. As a football fan, and I saw somebody was tweeting yesterday about up the Rossies in relation to my addressing you. Regrettably, we need all the up the Rossies we can get these days, because we've been defeated each of the last 2 weekends, and we're facing Kerry this weekend. I'm very much looking forward to going to a football match sometime soon. And I'm also, although I wouldn't be someone who goes to the pub that often, I do find myself dreaming of sitting at a bar and drinking a pint of Guinness. So it's, I think I suppose those are my personal examples of the things where I think some of the simple things in life is what many of us miss. And we're very much looking forward to getting back to that. But I suppose in terms of universities, what has COVID taught us? And I think obviously we've seen our system severely disrupted, as with all aspects of society. But I think what we've seen is that universities have displayed enormous flexibility and agility in dealing with the crisis. And I think that's a testament to the great resilience and the staff that we have through the system. And I think you, as much as any sector within universities, have seen how it has disrupted your lives. I mean, you've seen, libraries have had the full spectrum of change, from full closure through to, book and sort of time slots for students, to click and collect, and now hopefully emerging back into some level of more normalized, although perhaps not quite the same as what we were before. So I think you have had a particularly challenging experience, and I think you've shown, as has been shown throughout our system, great agility in dealing with that. I think the teaching and learning side in our universities has been really pushed in very rapidly and has responded very positively to the challenges that it faces. One of the projects that we run that's funded through the HEA is the EDTL, the Enhanced Digital Teaching and Learning Program. That's now coming on 2 years in. All our member universities are involved in that program. And its mission was to, and is, to enhance the capacity of our system to embrace digital. Now, when that project was envisaged 3 years ago, and when it got up and running 2 years ago, we never envisaged that we'd be thrust into a real live experiment on digital teaching and learning. And in a way, I suppose there's very few positives to COVID, but if there was a positive, this project is probably one that I think is seeing a positive, because probably what they've seen is we have advanced our capacity probably more in 12 or 15 months than we might otherwise have. It might otherwise have taken us 5 or 7 years to progress. That isn't to say that the progression or the digital experience has been flawless. There's been lots of challenges and lots of learning, but I think it's that learning that is really going to stand to us in terms of how we prepare for what will undoubtedly be a future with a greater digital element in it. So I think there, somewhat of a bonus in that space. But I think the real thing that COVID has taught us is the value of universities and higher education. And I think if you look at how it has now profiled the fact that science and knowledge and expert advice really matters. So this somewhat, what previously may have been seen as a somewhat anonymous, unseen value of what higher education and knowledge creation is about, I think it's come into its own in COVID. I mean, who would have thought that, immunologists would become media stars? And of course, now we have a number of them who are on the tip of our tongues, both nationally and internationally. So I think that, that has to be a long-term positive legacy for our sector. I think the public are now seeing the important public role that universities and higher ed institutions have. We've shown that in terms of, we stepped up to the plate, not just in terms of what we've done in our own institutions on teaching and learning and research, but our hugely important role from an early stage in the pandemic through our involvement with contact tracing, vaccine research, a whole range of our personnel seconded into the health system and to the public sector generally to support the pandemic response. And now, you know, with a number of our institutions involved in running vaccine centres in partnership with the HSE, and a number of institutions involved in antigen rapid testing. So I think we've seen a real practical, fast turnaround to step up to the plate when it matters, to support society, to support government, and to support the national effort. I think it's also shown us, though, from a student perspective, that college is a whole lot more than just about books and learning, because I think it's really brought on, I speak here not just in a professional capacity, but as a father of two college-going girls. And I think we've all seen, and probably no family who hasn't been touched by this in one way or another, have seen how really challenging it has been for students, be they primary, secondary, but I think particularly third level students who have had a whole part of the most formative years of their lives disrupted. And I think it's brought home to us that college is more than just the books and the teaching and the learning. It's also about that life-forming experience. You know, that's probably something that's impossible to put on the spreadsheet when you're talking with government. But I think in terms of societal development and our capacity as a nation, I think it amplifies that much more so than ever before. I think the second question I wanted to briefly reflect on is what's needed for our universities to excel. So I think, as we've shown during COVID, as I've just mentioned, our role in society, and I think our role as economic partners in society as well, I think is fully recognized. We now have a new department, which I think is a clear recognition of government, of the centrality of higher education and research as key partners in our society and in our economy. I think we've seen you know, while if you go back a year ago, the projections of the economic collapse, and obviously there's been huge parts of our economy that have suffered and are still suffering badly, but our tax take has held up remarkably well. And I think we need to reflect on why that has happened. And it has happened because a group of core economic clusters, ICT, medtech, biopharma, agri-food, data, those clusters have supported both the income tax and the corporation tax base of the economy. And it has held up much better than projected. And those sectors are entirely linked to universities and higher education. We're the people who produce the talent base that fuel those sectors, and that indeed fuel the research activity that supports many of them as well. And we're in partnership. If you look at those clusters around the country, all of them are centered around, are directly connected with universities or other higher institutes of technology. So I think our centrality as a partner in the economy, again, has been brought to the fore. And I think that centrality is crucially important as we're now undertaking a review of and government will shortly be announcing a review of the National Development Plan. We've made a very strong case to government that just as they need to invest in roads and railways and physical infrastructure, they also need to invest in higher education and research. And you know, we're hopeful that the government will respond to that. The creation of a new department of further higher education and research, I think, is a first step in that process. But now that needs to be matched with the investment in the infrastructure, both in terms of our research and our physical campuses. We're facing probably anything between 20 and 25% increase in student numbers over the next decade. So we have real capacity constraints, and we need the investment in that, as well as in the digital infrastructure and in our research infrastructure to support that growth. But the other thing I think that's needed for universities to excel is that the core funding is addressed. I mean, the issues on this have been well heralded. It's over 5 years since the Castles report was published. We now have a study that's imminent on that from an EU-funded study, which Indicon are involved in, coming back to government in the next couple of months. And our Minister, Harris, has committed to acting on that when he gets it, and we're very hopeful that he does. But a couple of stark facts that really amplify the challenge that we face in this regard. In 2008, if we look at just the core staff, the funded under core funding, there were 19,300 staff, and these are HEA figures across higher education, supporting a population of 155,000 students with 1.55 billion euro core funding. In 2020, 12 years later, still the same number of core funded staff, 19,300, but now supporting 213,000 full-time equivalent students. That's as against 155,000 12 years ago, with a 1.4 billion euro. So we're doing a huge amount more with less. There has been a positive increase in the last couple of years from government on funding, but this needs to be accelerated. And we need to get back up. Our staff-student ratios are 21 to 1 when last measured in last published figures in 2018-19. I think they're now much greater than that. But we need those pulled back down to the European average of 14 or 15 to 1 if we are to excel as institutes of learning and of research and compete with the best in Europe. The second thing that's needed for us to excel is there's legislative change imminent at the moment, reform of the HEA Act. And that needs to be reformed. It's a half a century old. But it is important in that reform process that, yes, it needs to deal with accountability, and we're fully willing to have proper and appropriate accountability measures for universities to account for the monies that they get, which I think they do very well from government or from elsewhere. But it's important that that government do not overstep the mark on that, and that they bring an overbearing control on the sector, because as we've seen in COVID, it is the agility and flexibility of institutions to respond when the need is greatest that has been shown to be a hugely important factor in the success of our universities. And it's important that, you know, we don't impose a dead hand of centralized control on that we achieve the accountability that's important and that we're up for, but that we do not step over the line and infringe on that capacity to respond to the needs of society or indeed of the economy. Finally, the third question I wanted to ask is, you know, what will the university of the future look like? A question that I'm not proposing to be able to answer. I'm not sure anyone can answer it accurately. All I know is I think it's going to be different. I think the profile of universities in 10 years' time is going to be quite different to what it was 10 years ago or even now. But I think what's important is that in that altered profile of universities in the future, that our universities and other HEIs, that they retain the bedrock of quality accredited institutions of learning and research, because I think it's critical that that bedrock of quality and excellence is maintained into the future. I think the modes of learning will change. I've spoken about that already. I think, you know, we're hearing a lot about blended learning. What exactly emerges in that, I think, remains to be seen, but I think we're seeing signals of that. One of our members, University of Limerick, recently launched an immersive software degree program, a 4-year degree program, half of which would be spent by the students in partner commercial entities, mostly large multinational ICT companies, and half spent on campus. So it's essentially a version of an apprenticeship degree program. I think we're going to see more of that. That may not be universal across the system. It may be for particular disciplines and for particular courses. But I do think we're going to see more innovation in that space in the year ahead. I think we're going to see much more emphasis on lifelong learning. We ourselves, one of the projects that we have recently got funding for through the Human Capital Initiative, through the HEI, is our multi-campus micro-credentials program. It's a €12.5 million program, and it'll be run over the next 4 to 5 years. And really what it's about is trying to, first of all, create a platform whereby universities can offer properly accredited micro-credential programs, perhaps as small as 1 ECTS and up to 20, 25 or 30 ECTS. But that is done in a fully accredited system, that each institution will recognize the other institutions learning in this space, and that these are then properly accredited. And like a key platform of the program is working with QQI to ensure that accreditation is appropriately marshaled. But then ultimately that these microcreds could be stacked and saved in a digital wallet. So this is a groundbreaking program. Again, we think COVID has probably brought home the importance of this kind of development in the sector, and we're very hopeful that we can forge a new way of doing that and build a platform where we can credibly build a whole stream for lifelong learning. And that maybe for people who are in careers who want to build up more credentials with different disciplines, or it may be for other people who want to undertake a career change. No doubt in your own area, in libraries, there'll be very significant changes, and you're the experts in that space, but it's certain that the future will bring change in that as well. And I think finally, partnerships is something that is an increasingly important feature of universities, be it with each other, with universities internationally, or indeed with business. And I think that is certainly going to be an increasingly important feature of the future of a university. So I'll leave it there. Thank you for your time and for the opportunity to meet you today.